afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Will you fasten your seatbelts for takeoff, please? Thank you.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome to Sound Salad, where we toss around all things spoken and all things heard. Brought to you by Audiobooks New Zealand, New Zealand's leading producer of audio content.
We hope that you will have a pleasant journey, and if we can add to your comfort in any way, please do not hesitate to press the call bell.
Hello. The biggest question or debate that I've been able to sort of find in and around audiobooks and audio content is the question of, does listening to an audiobook count as much as reading one? Now, I'm not a huge fan of the terminology count because I think everyone's individual experience of any artistic medium is entirely valid and relative to that individual. However, purists often cling to the literal meaning of the word read, which is why I got in my friend Micheil Reid, who you guessed works with me at Blind Low Vision NZ. I just thought maybe he could give us an insight into his experience with audiobooks. Micheil, do you want to tell us who you are and what it is that you do for BLVNZ?
I'm Micheil Reid. I work at Blind Low Vision New Zealand and I do hard copy scanning. We provide books in braille and large print as well as audio. My job is to hard copy scan books which get turned into large print or braille when the foundation can't get files, text files from publishers on time.
Yeah,
so,
right.
That's what I do. So I don't have anything directly to do with the audio studios at all, really, but I am and have been an avid and keen listener to talking books, as we used to call them. And in almost all the media that we've used, from the large 6-track talking book tapes to cassettes to and even the vinyl records. We used to have them on vinyl records at one time.
Yeah.
And of course now to an app. I've got the app for my cell phone.
Is that BookLink? Is that what that is?
No, I can't remember what it's called now. Oh, I should have researched that. I've got it on my phone. I can't remember the name of it.
Doesn't matter, it's all good.
But an app that I can download books to.
Yeah, nice.
And once I get started, reading them, I can go on for hours and hours, especially if I'm gripped by the story.
Yeah, totally. Well, do you remember your first encounter with audiobooks? Because you went to Hormai, right? The school.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I went there as from the age of 5 in 1965, and I encountered talking books a lot as I was growing up in all their various forms. I quickly, as I grew older, I quickly actually got more interested in reading books in print, and I always liked the independence of being able to do that. But I've actually found that both reading books and listening to them have much the same effect for me. So, I can read a book and get into the story and, begin to imagine the places and the scenes and the sounds of people's voices. But I also like talking books because sometimes the narrator creates a whole new version of a story. Sometimes the images are much clearer, and because somebody else is doing the reading, the images can be clearer, the atmosphere can be much more acute. That's what I found anyway.
So did you have them, is audio content sort of something that you remember quite a lot from when you were at the Hormai College? Because did you have to be vision impaired to attend that school, or was it?
Certainly back then, it was a school for the blind, and they didn't call us low vision. We were called partially sighted then. And there were probably more partially sighted students there than when I was there than people who were totally blind.
Yeah.
But there were a few totally blind people there. I think that in the early days, it was only totally blind people that could have talk book machines.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but that's how I remember it. It wasn't really until the 1990s that I first heard about print handicapped, they used to call it, or print disabled people that could get access to talking book through the National Library of New Zealand. I did have something to do with that. I used to transfer our 4-track books to 2-track tape for the National Library, and they would get sent down. Back in those days, I think they were in Palmerston North. I think they're in Wellington now. I did that for about 18 months as a government contract, on a government contract, using the Foundation's facilities to do the tape transfers. I really enjoyed doing that work. I heard lots and lots of books, mostly New Zealand ones, from New Zealand writers. And at that time, we were really just starting to explore recording more books written by New Zealand authors.
Yeah, right. Was that at the foundation at that time, would have been called?
Yes, that was in our old library building on Tutoki Street in Parnell.
Yeah, right. It's interesting, eh? I mean, it's funny to me that, I mean, I think, what was it, 1961 or 1963, that the Blind Foundation first started recording the audiobooks using, local artists, local talent, local actors, narrators. And it is funny to me that, it took so long for them to actually start to do Kiwi titles, like the first one obviously was, I think, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But afterwards, there's sort of just this kind of, sequence of random sort of graphic novels, just random novel titles that aren't by Kiwi authors at all, but were clearly potentially of interest during that time.
Back in those days, also, we would get books from the RNIB, Royal National Institute for the Blind in England. We got a lot of their books from them, and they would be all kinds of novels or non-fiction. By the time I was working in the library, we had a huge catalogue of talking books that dealt with just about every subject going. The library service, I believe, is very popular among the blind and low vision members. And I know that people are always clamouring for more, so it's got to be a good thing.
I know they've only sort of increased in popularity and in sales and in use and in everything, really, over the years. What was it that made you want to work for BLVNZ in the first place?
Well, actually, it was because I have a friend who was working in the library, and I basically wanted to work where he was. We both shared a passion for music and for sound audio recording and that sort of thing. And he was already recording talking books at that time.
Really?
And did so for many years. Yeah. So that was basically my motive for getting to work there. Yeah.
Right. So you just shoulder tapped your mate and was like, "Can you hook me up a job?"
Well, no, it wasn't quite like that. But the opportunity to do the National Library books came up, and I took the plunge. Me and another person, and the other person lucked out, and I got in. The idea was that I was going to do the National Library, and then I was going to have a go at doing recording magazines, because we record those as well, like The Listener and Metro and all those sort of things. But that didn't end up happening. I ended up just doing the National Library work. Yeah. This is before I started doing the scanning, and I started doing that quite a few years ago. The government contract, of course, got severed after the election in 1990, when the new government came in, and they decided that it was too expensive, so they just stopped it. And that was a great pity, because it was work I really enjoyed.
Interesting.
That's how I remember it, just in case there's anybody out there in the know who's going to hear this thing. No, that's not how it was.
I love it. So how many years have you been working for BLVNZ?
Since I was 16 in 1976, I started out in their sheltered workshops.
And how old are you now, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm 60.
16 to 60. Goodness gracious me. That's impressive. Wow.
Yeah. And well, I like working there. I enjoy the company of the people, and I've seen a lot of changes over the years. But the one thing that doesn't change is people's passion for audiobooks.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting that, I mean, every sort of narrator that I meet, or, anyone that comes on and that's new, anyone that the sort of novelty of the work itself hasn't really worn off for as well. It's really lovely meeting new people that are into it. They kind of go, oh, this is all so new, and it's also exciting to be able to play in this way, which is really cool. And it's a nice little reminder of how fun the actual work is, really, and also of how fun the people are, and all of the personalities that, are kind of drawn to that sort of work as well.
Yeah, well, I've met some interesting people, like radio personalities, actors, people who do radio work, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know, all sorts. So how many audiobooks would you say that you were mentioning that you enjoyed physically reading just as much as listening on to an audiobook. Based on that, how many would you say that you have read? And when I say that, I mean just listened to. So the audio side of things, how many would you say over all the years?
I couldn't say really, because I would secondhand hear books, because when I was at school, lived in a dormitory, so there'd be
Yeah.
people with talking book machines in there. I do remember listening many years ago, listening to The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis on vinyl talking book.
Yeah.
I remember that very distinctly.
Gosh.
And of course, the narrators back then were pretty boring. They kind of droned on and on. The narrators we have now, I think, are a little bit more lively, a little bit more interesting.
Yeah. So did you start with audiobooks at school, or were audiobooks not really a sort of part of the education system, so to speak? Would some of your earlier books have been educational ones based on the fact that you were at the school?
No, all my educational material was always in print. And the other students whose vision was too low, they read Braille. Most of our talking books we listened to then were books for pleasure.
Yeah, right. That's cool. So obviously, though, they have been a presence in your life since then, though.
Well, no, not really. I mean, music history, I'm kind of interested in that. So, I've listened to books on that, even books on New Zealand music history. I started listening to the Shane P. Carter book just a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
But I haven't gotten any further through that.
Yeah.
I'll go back to it eventually. My personal taste is science fiction and kind of medieval fantasy and autobiographies I really like listening to. But people listen to whatever they want to. And as I say, we've got a catalogue that's large enough to cater for most people's tastes.
I know. It's huge. My God. It's been going for how many years, and it still keeps getting things added to it. So which is great. So your favorite genre is the sort of sci-fi fantasy sort of genre then, eh?
See, I think the great thing about listening to talking books is that, especially with those kind of genres, is that they can really take you out of your own personal surroundings.
Yeah, totally.
You become, and if a narrator is really good, they can really create the sound of a character that might be different from how you would read it yourself if you were reading the book. You really get the sense of, the dankness of the castle.
I know. I agree.
Yeah, or the gripping fear that you might have as you're overlooking the battle while all the armies are in array and you're waiting for something to happen. And you don't always get that reading a book unless the writing is really excellent.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, there's so many different schools of thought in that. Some people that have tried audio and hated it for that reason, because they don't like people giving them a preconceived notion of how they should be receiving the material. Other people love that side of it because, exactly like what you said, it sort of cracks open the world a bit more and makes it a bit more of a tangible, experiential sort of thing rather than just something that you're simply passively taking in. There is obviously word about it being an incomplete experience of the book if you do go for the audio version. Now, I have a feeling that probably would have stemmed from or originated from the ages back when, we could only actually fit a certain amount of content on any device that it was being recorded on. The whole abridged version of things. I can imagine the abridged version of Lord of the Rings wouldn't be quite that satisfying, perhaps. But
as far as I remember, when we had the 6-track, they were quite large cassettes, and they had machines that were specifically built for them. Those could get up to 30 hours of audio on them.
30 hours, and that's for six big, and that's on six big different cassette tapes.
Yeah, but the tape moved across the heads relatively slowly compared to cassettes so we can store that much information on a CD too, but they are at lower resolution than that MP3. They're that sized file so that they can fit the whole of a large book onto 1 or 2 CDs.
Yeah.
In the case of the early days, even the vinyl, they used to have huge box sets of multiple records so that they could get an entire novel onto those. But those, of course, because of that limit that you're talking about with vinyl, and to some degree cassettes, because they were at lower resolution too, if they were novels. If they were magazines, they just played at normal speed. But,
right.
If they were novels, they were on lower speed. But even so, you might have 6 or 8 or 10 cassettes that would cover a whole book. And as far as I know, there wasn't really any attempt to abridge talking books back in the day, or certainly not today either. Right, I could be wrong about that, and somebody's can happily correct me if I'm
Yeah,
if
no,
I'm
well, I
wrong, but,
mean, I think that's sort of where the sort of rub came from with that thought of it being an incomplete experience, because of the fact that in the bygone times they would actually have to abridge audiobooks. But what I would think fascinating with that, and actually, potentially equally as unsatisfying as an abridged version of the story full stop, is that sometimes, or oftentimes, it wouldn't necessarily be the authors who are the ones in charge of those edits. If you're looking at cassette tape and you've just got rolls and rolls and rolls of it, it's sort of the audio engineer's job to just go snip, as soon as the time is kind of up, which is petrifying when you think about it, because any of those edits can dramatically change the story, obviously, and it can dramatically change your experience of that writer's voice, all of that sort of stuff. Obviously, nowadays we can get the full story the way that the author intended it. But yeah, it is something that's sort of interesting to think on, really. If I were to think about actually hiring out an abridged version of a novel these days, I can imagine that it wouldn't actually be necessarily as satisfying.
I do believe that some commercial books are abridged, but as far as I know, when we were recording at the Foundation, we never did abridged books. And the other thing too, I've noticed about listening to talking books is I've tended to listen to books I wouldn't otherwise read. I was never a big fan of the classic science fiction writers like your John Wyndham's, Jules Verne, or people like that. But I'd probably listen to their books on Talking Book. I remember listening to The Kraken Wakes, which is by John Wyndham. I remember listening to that on Talking Book. And I think it was just because his writing was a bit more arcane than modern writing. I think I found that a bit stuffy, but it was a ripping yarn though. And so I think that I tend to be more open-minded to different types of books or different types of authors, listening to them on Talking Book, because the narrator is doing the hard work of having to plow through difficult to read material. Also, a lot of those books were written, even the paperbacks written, the text was very small.
Oh, yes.
So a lot of those older books, so, listening to them on Talking Book is therefore much easier.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oh, gosh, I finished one the other day. What was it? By Kurt von Lustbader, I believe his name was. And he had a trilogy, I think it was called something to do with The Sunset King. I ironically started with the fourth of the series. It's really frustrating sometimes when that happens, because you just don't know which book in the sequence it is. You have not really much of an idea until you really sort of get into the book and sort of understand the world and who's in it and where they've been before and where they haven't been yet and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, it's funny because, yes, the writing is tiny, the text, the actual print itself is tiny. The pages feel different, I mean, these, I think he started writing in 1965, and they sort of traverse about a decade. So I think the last one's written in, I think the late 70s or so. It's interesting how obvious the difference in writing style and writing quality is from back then to now. And also it's interesting that so many of those huge world ideas were being explored in such an original way, I feel, whereas these days I often find that a lot of the sci-fi novels, or, especially young adult sci-fi novels that I'm sort of asked to narrate at work, they've got very similar themes, very similar, in all honesty, very similar storylines a lot of the time, it'll follow a very similar kind of narrative, or at least narrative structure, to the point where, you kind of go, gosh, has everything been done in this territory, but reading some of those older ones, you kind of go, gosh, this would have been brand new back then. It would have been something that would have been pretty groundbreaking. But also the sort of thing that I know that you were saying, that the narrator is sitting there having had done all of the hard work and things. But I feel like sometimes it's a bit of a gift getting those novels, because, you might have 2-3 pages of just descriptive text about a thing that's happening, about a journey that the hero's going on, about, I don't know, some dream that one of the characters is in the middle of or something, but it really barrels along. It oftentimes it's really active text, like you sort of feel as though you're kind of walking or moving with the protagonist. And if you're kind of giving it a sort of bit of real rhythm and a bit of real life, then, you can just sort of go through pages and pages and pages relatively quickly, still being legible and still giving a decent performance, but you just kind of, launch your way through it just by proxy, the actual content itself, So I sometimes find them a little bit easier to be honest,
Mm. Well, I think the sad thing with science fiction, particularly these days, is that it's lost its sense of what is it. Everything has to be explained, and there has to be an ending and a wind up, an epilogue, or whatever. My favourite thing, for instance, about John Wyndham's Day of the Triffids is that it doesn't really have an ending. The Triffids aren't gotten rid of. They're still there at the end of the story. And then there was the brilliance of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, where, after all the armies had tried destroying the Martian aliens, it was microbes that ended up killing them. It was a clever ending. It was a good idea. And but I find a lot of modern science fiction doesn't have that, anymore. That sense of what is it. Like with 2001: A Space Odyssey, I read the novel of that, and Arthur C. Clarke did sort of explain what was going on. When you see the movie version, it doesn't explain anything. And those are the kinds of science fiction I like, where the author tells a story and he doesn't attempt to explain where it came from or what it's made of necessarily, or even what it is. And it's left to your imagination. And I think that that's a sad thing missing from that. And the reason I like listening to science fiction novels or fantasy novels is because they take you into another place. They take you into another world where the physics of that world, or the laws of that world, or the powers of that world are something completely different from the world that we live in. And I prefer myself fantasy novels that aren't set on Earth, but are set on Earth-like worlds, but where the physics is different. Nobody has to explain that. And I find that listening to somebody reading that, especially if I sit and listen to it in a dark room, where I cut off all light, I'm really transported to that world. And that's what I love about listening to people reading novels to me. I mean, as a kid, I had teachers who would read stories to me, and that would fill my mind with all kinds of imaginary things. I remember hearing a story once about the battle at Glencoe in Scotland, and it was read to me, and it was read to me by somebody who was actually Scottish. It conjured up clear images and lots of atmosphere too of what it would be like, preparing for this famous battle. It was terrific. And I get that from reading books, but sometimes I get it more by not actually having to read the text and listen to the narrator telling the story. And it creates an atmosphere of joy or fear or excitement, or brings a particular mood into the room or into myself.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of leads us quite organically onto sort of, I suppose, the latter part of our wee chat. I found, which is kind of the how and why do you listen, I suppose, in a lot of ways. So obviously, you were saying that only a couple of people back when you were at Hormai had the actual devices that they needed, talking book players and things. So obviously nowadays, we've got apps on our phone, like you were mentioning at the beginning, where even if we can't remember the names of those apps, we have them. And we have any number of capacities where we are able to constantly listen. And I think another sort of point of contention around that is that when you are listening, obviously you have the capacity to do other things. So I think those sort of purists would also sit in the realm of going, when you have to read a book, you're forced to sit there and focus on the book itself. You're forced to focus on the text. You're forced to focus on the experience of reading the book. Whereas when you have an audiobook, you have the freedom to be able to be doing other things. So some would say that that's a blessing, and others would say that that's a terrible thing and a travesty to the story, et cetera, et cetera.
I suppose it's up to the individual, but actually, like with music, I like to be focused on listening to the talking book.
Same.
Because the only downside of that sometimes is that sometimes I might nod off to sleep during the book, and I end up having to go back a few chapters to, what did I miss there? And I know lots of people that that's happened to. I wouldn't want to be doing something else, because that would take me out of that. That would take me out of that imaginary world. I'd be thinking about what I was doing instead. I'm not one of those who vacuums to music or vacuums to listening to a talking book.
Oh, God, I know. Me neither.
That's just me. I like to be able to focus on what I'm listening to and, get into it. And I remember the book that you did that I listened to, I would, start at about 8:30 at night, and I'd keep going till 12, 1, 2 in the morning.
Really?
Because I was so gripped. Yeah, because
Which
I was
book
so
was
gripped
that?
by the story. The David Hare one, yeah. The Moontide Quartet, I read the whole lot, all 4 of them, and I thought he was a wonderful writer.
Yeah, he's pretty
And
prolific, eh?
yeah, and I'd really like him to know that, that I in particular had enjoyed it so much. Being a low vision person, enjoys listening to talking books, that giving us permission to, or allowing us to be able to record that book has given pleasure to others. That might actually even be better than the joy of reading it, for oneself, because there are a lot of people out there who, those books would probably in Braille, they'd be in multiple volumes. It'd be quite a task to read through them in Braille.
Oh,
But
yeah,
listening to them
totally.
on Talking Book, you really get drawn into the story. I thought they were brilliantly written, and I thought you in particular did a great job of interpreting the story without over interpreting it.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, and
Yeah, I think that was my first real big sci-fi lot. That quartet, actually, it was a bit of a baptism by fire. Thanks for that, Simon Lynch. But it was good. It was really good learning. It was a really good opportunity to also be exposed to David Hare, the writer. So I think he's definitely going to have to be someone that we bring on board for an interview, because he's written so much in the realm of young adult fiction, and and I think there are a lot of writers that are relatively prolific that, because they don't achieve the same sort of esteem as perhaps Joy Cowley or Witi Ihamaida or anyone like that, we they sort of slip under the radar, and we kind of miss out on a lot of them because there is so much content and there is an oversaturation, blah, blah, blah. But I think, it's really important to note when we do find the ones, especially the, local ones, who really are sort of doing it, are really kind of, walking the walk and doing a bloody good job of it.
I thought he was good quality enough. My favorite fantasy writer is a guy called Tad Williams, and David Hare is certainly up there with him. And
that's good.
And I thought that David Hare's story, that Moontide Quartet, was really original. It was a clever idea, and listening to you reading it, you really captured his world or worlds in that. And I think that's a thing that narrators that we have should receive more appreciation, from us who read these books, because they don't really know how they're being received a lot of the time, and they do a lot of work and they sometimes don't get enough feedback. And so I'm passing on my feedback to all of you guys for excellent work done, because I know it's not easy to do it. I know you read, make a mistake, and you have to go back, and then you've got to recapture that atmosphere that you had, the flow that you had going before.
It's like a cut and a shot, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I've sat in on a lot of sessions, talking book reading sessions, and I know how frustrating it can be sometimes. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be speaking with most of them over the series of the podcast, I suppose. I think I'm speaking with Paul Barrett, I believe, tomorrow. So he'll be giving us plenty to speak about. I think he's a bit of a sci-fi and non-fiction buff as well when it comes to all the things that he gets asked to narrate and things for the foundation. So that's cool. Well, I found a wee pie chart, actually, just with some stats around why it is, I guess, that people do engage with audiobooks. Audiobook readers, I will call them, and what they thought that the key benefits of audiobooks were for them in their lives. I mean, obviously, if your learning style is oral, then there might be a sort of, sway towards the educational or just simply understanding the world realm of things. But this was just a standard group of several smaller groups of audiobook readers. So these are the reasons why they engaged with audiobooks or what the benefits were for them. So 26% said that they simply liked listening to storytelling, which is nice. 26% mentioned accessibility and the fact that it was time-saving, which is also interesting because, in a way, the length of time that it takes you to hear a book, technically, I imagine, depending on your reading capabilities, would be the same length of time that it would take to read it sometimes.
Actually, I found that getting through talking books is much quicker. Now, I got through those 4 books in about 2 months or something like that. Now, it would have taken me about 2 months just to read the first book in that series.
Really? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Because I used to sit for hours reading, but now I find that if I sit there for too long reading, I nod off to sleep.
Yeah,
Reading
for
a book,
sure.
like
Do you
physically
use
reading.
do you use like magnifying glasses or anything like
No,
that to sort
well,
of assist you reading?
I download my books to a tablet, so
Ah, right.
they're
Okay.
in large print. So
I
and
see.
that has actually sped it up a little bit. But I used to read trade paperbacks. I used to call them. They're quite large format books with what I would call paperback sized text. So those would take me a long time, because most of the books I read are like, 700 or 800 pages.
Yes.
I think the longest one I ever read was about 1,400 pages. The
Oh,
Lord of the
wow.
Rings, I think I did that in one big gulp, and that's well over 1,000 pages too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Good Lord.
I
Well, so
haven't, I
time
haven't,
saving for some then.
yeah. But the David Hare ones I got through nice and quickly, mainly because I was so gripped by the story, and
Yeah.
it kept me going. Yeah, kept
It
me
keeps you in,
tapping
eh?
on the screen going. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
That had a lot to do with the way that it was read and narrated. If it had been a really dry voice, a not very interesting voice, it
Yeah.
might have been more tedious. And I remember reading David Eddings, one of his series that was really good.
Mm,
And the first few books in that series was read by a guy who was very engaging.
yeah.
Then I came across another, because the later books read by other people, and there was one guy that was reading, and he was spelling every word that was like an unusual or
Oh
made up word.
no, really?
And that
Oh, I can't stand
infuriated
that.
me. And yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So that was a little bit annoying, kind of
yeah.
ruined the story. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I bet. Oh,
And it was an Australian, the first 2 or 3 books in that series was, he was a narrator from Australia, and he was really good. Sadly, I can't remember his name now, but he was excellent. And David Eddings wasn't a writer I particularly wanted to read physically. I
yeah.
was much more, because I like the concept of the story a lot. Somebody had recommended it to me, actually, somebody at Foundation, and
Oh,
but I
right.
listened to it on Talking Book and thoroughly enjoyed the story. But
Mm.
it got more difficult to listen to it when I hear the different narrators who interpreted the characters completely differently.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, I mean, there's sort of schools of thought as well that are, swing between, whether people that enjoy actors reading books versus people that enjoy the authors themselves narrating their own books.
Mm,
Obviously,
mm,
sometimes, the actual author themselves can bring a different sort of tone or life to a book because it's obviously a
mhm,
world that's been sitting in them or that they've been sitting with for a very long time.
mm.
So there's a certain depth or clarity there that potentially could be gained that an actor couldn't. But yeah, that's an interesting one, really. I personally, I'll be devil's advocate, I suppose, in the sense of saying that I far prefer performers or actors, or at least people who have had some kind of presenting or some kind of, I don't know, just something that has involved them having to public speak in a way that uses emphasis, passion,
Yeah.
accents, perhaps, if that's necessary. It's not
Mm,
really, but
mm, mm,
anyone that's really got a bit of a fire in their belly to be able to
mhm.
get behind some of the stuff that they might have to say. A lot of the stuff sometimes some of the stuff that you have to say, you don't really want to have to say.
Mm,
It's
mm,
not
mm.
the most pleasant stuff to read. Anything about war. There's a lot of autobiographical stuff that we've read. The Maori Land Wars or the New Zealand Wars,
Mm.
all kinds of stuff, all sorts of stuff.
To me, non-fiction needs a certain type of narrator. I think that people who read fiction, I think that there are the right voices for biographical stuff, and there's a different voice for imaginary stuff.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
yeah,
And
totally.
you could have somebody. I've heard narrators who are very good for reading magazine articles who are terrible for reading novels.
Yeah, I
And
know. Yeah, that's an interesting one, as well. The sort of
yeah,
style or genre of writing can
yeah.
depend.
And I think that when you're reading something that's factual, you have to be a lot less emotional, a lot less, I don't know what the right word is.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, I
There's
suppose
a lot
a
less
lot,
performance involved in it. Yeah.
yeah, a lot less connected to the reality of what you're saying, which is sometimes pretty
Yeah. Yeah.
gruesome.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting watching news presenters where they are trying to be factual, but they're also trying to be polite. They're trying to
Yeah,
inform their audience, so they can't afford to be too overly emotional in their delivery.
yeah,
Um,
totally. And
whereas
they also
if
can't
you,
afford to have any bias in their delivery
Yeah,
or
yeah,
any
yeah,
of their own personal opinion,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is interesting
That's
because
it sometimes does leak through, I've noticed.
yes, totally.
That the news personality will smile or will scowl or something
Yeah.
like that. So they might be moved by the horror of something or disturbed by the cruelty of something, but usually they try to be neutral. That's how I think that reading non-fiction should be. It should be neutral. That's just
Yeah.
my opinion, of course. There are like a lot of people who listen to that and go, "Oh, what a load of rubbish he's saying,"
Oh no, it's all
among
it's
your
all it's
listeners.
all personal taste, really, And
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of
that's right.
different personal taste thing, like me and Josh were speaking in our episode about we used to sort of dream up notions of making sort of audio movies out of our books, so that I could just basically narrate a novel with all of the bells and whistles of whatever that novel required vocally.
Yeah.
And he would go away with a bunch of muso mates and build a big soundscape and whatnot for it, like build audio settings and things, and I know that that's happening already in the sort of audiobook world and realm. I also know that there are a lot of people that are really anti that, a lot of people don't want any faff around the actual words. They just want to be able to hear someone speaking into their ear something that moves them, which is totally fair enough as well.
Right, I'm in that camp.
Yeah.
I don't mind a dramatic version of a book.
So as in like having like multiple characters or like multiple actors or narrators or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Multiple characters, multiple actors. When I was a kid, I used to like listening to radio plays, things like that, or comedy shows or things like that. And I would be in, with somebody with a radio and, listening to a comedy or listening to a
totally.
serial and, where they've got sound effects and, things like that in the story. And I don't mind that, but I don't like listening to a narrator talking and hearing music underneath it or sound effects when it's just one narrator reading and they're not really acting, they're just telling a story. That kind of irritates me, and I'm very glad that we don't do that at Foundation, much to Josh's chagrin, I'm sure.
Oh well, he's got heaps of other stuff to keep himself busy now. So the next sort of step down was another 16%, which was building concentration and mental fitness. So some people found that listening to audiobooks increased their mental fitness and helped to build their concentration. The next one down was 13% for the consumption of knowledge. So it's interesting to actually think about how we do receive knowledge. I mean, what you're just speaking about the news presenters, that's kind of probably one of the few ways, other than social media and all of the sort of news, current affairs things that I would follow on my own social media, or the people that I have in my life that I follow as well. So much of my knowledge is consumed in that way, but it's sort of such a different thing. And I suppose it harkens into the education side of the kind of argument around, the fact that some people literally may not have access to that knowledge without it being in that sort of format or form, which I always find interesting.
Well, I think that media has really exploded education, because you can watch things on YouTube where you can get knowledge about things or information about things you never could when you were at school. You just didn't have access.
Yeah.
When I was a kid at school, I didn't have access to that. And I've listened to a few non-fiction science books on Talking Book. And, because I'm quite interested in learning some of that stuff, And so I think that education through that media is an excellent idea. And I'm sure that I hope that we'll do, like science, on things like astronomy or quantum physics or those sort of things. They're fascinating subjects. And if a book is well written where they explain it clearly what they're talking about, it can be quite enthralling. But again, you need the right sort of narrator for that. You can make it sound interesting without injecting too much emotion.
Yeah, definitely.
So I love documentaries about that sort of thing. And
totally. Yeah. And I suppose, non-fiction audiobooks would be the equivalent, the oral equivalent, to a documentary in a lot of ways, depending on how it's pieced together.
Yeah.
The next...
Oh, some books are better written than others. So,
totally.
And the narrator has to put up with that. Sometimes the information's inaccurate or it's unclear or whatever, and that would make narration difficult.
Yes, I know it definitely helps when you've got a good script. The next one down at 10% were people that used audiobooks for relaxation and sleep, and the longevity and maintenance of learned English. So that's a whole
that one.
Totally. That's a whole other kettle of fish, eh? I remember, little language audiobooks from when I was a kid, like French and stuff like that, you know, and they'd have a little dring when it was time to turn the page. And oh gosh.
All right.
Languages, full stop. There would be just, so much there. The last three are at 3% each. So one of them is, I think, an obvious one, which we've already hearkened to as well, shared experiences with children and family. You know, that sort of thing of coming together around the radio. Like we've spoken about that before in many other conversations and episodes where, you know, there is a wonderful power that the audio book full stop has to just transport. And you've spoken about that multiple times as well. Just that thing of being able to completely absorb and transport, which is great. Yeah. The final two on 3% each, one of which was to save space, which I completely empathize with. Right. You know, someone needing
the wardrobe. Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, you'd need an entire wardrobe library just to be able to house all of the books that I have. I'm pretty sure, you know, my poor mother has boxes and boxes of them up in the attic of our house, all from high school, uni, you know, all over the place, secondhand bookshops. I just choose avidly to not get rid of them. I enjoy having them. But in this day and age, you know, I can't really afford an entire flat. I can afford a room in a flat. So that means that, you know, I kind of have to limit my library to what I can fit on my cell phone, more or less. So saving space is a bloody good thing. Thank you, audiobooks. Yeah. The last one, which I find endearing and divine, is final 3%, is that it helps them to fall in love with books again, which I love. Automatically. Yeah. I mean, you know, the word again, naturally, I think everybody from, you know, anybody that ever got read to when they were a kid, I think probably fell in love with storytelling or oral storytelling, or, you know, or it really appealed to that carnal or, you know, primal human thing of our condition, which is to be communal and to share oral history and story and myth and blah, 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 you know?
Yeah, well, sitting around the campfire and hearing tales,
totally.
Mythologies and that sort of thing,
And then as life goes on, life gets in the way and things like that. But to be able to say that people have fallen in love with books again, that gives us plenty of hope. Not that the audiobook industry needs much hope. It seems like it's going fine and dandy by the looks of things. You know, we've got, I think, well over 75 million people now, I think, each year that listen to an audiobook. The number continues to grow. That was one of the last stats from the Audio Publishers Association, but that probably has, you know, been superseded now. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are listening to audiobooks in their cars, and you know, there's a lot of
and audiobooks by way of podcast as well. You know, there's a lot of people that release audiobooks chapter by chapter, which, in my opinion, is a little bit lazy. But hey, it's a way to get it out there.
I mean, if it's encouraging people to read,
exactly,
to read novels, to read books, to do that sort of thing, it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Anything that gets people to read has got to be a good thing. Yeah.
It's got to be a good thing. I know. I completely agree. Oh, right. Well, on that very happy note, I thank you so much for chatting with us today. And no doubt we'll get you back at some point as well to tell us all about some more of your musical escapades. We didn't really go into that this time, but we will at some point, no doubt. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm Romy Hooper. You've been listening to Sound Salad, for all things spoken and all things heard. To hear more Sound Salad episodes, go to www.soundsalad.co.nz. This has been brought to you by my gold sponsor, Audiobooks NZ. Check out their library at www.audiobooksnz.co.nz.
We hope that you will have a pleasant journey, and if we can add to your comfort in any way, please do not hesitate to press the call bell.